My name is Halina Mirek, and I turned 71 last month. For most of my life, I've believed in neatness, the kind that keeps a house steady and a heart from falling apart. I still polish the handles of my kitchen drawers every Sunday and water the same 4 plants on the windowsill, each with its own chipped ceramic pot. Routine has always been my way of staying calm. That morning, calm didn't last long. I had my phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other when I called my son. Joran. The light through the curtains made the dust look like snow, floating between us as I asked, almost cheerfully, "So, when's the wedding? Darling, have you and Leda decided on a date?" There was a pause too long for something so simple. When his voice came, it sounded distant, rehearsed. "Yesterday," he said. "We got married yesterday. Only special people were invited." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. The words were too strange, too sharp to fit the tone of a Saturday morning. But then I heard Leda's laugh in the background, soft, confident, and I knew it was true. The coffee cooled in my hand, untouched. Across the room sat the sofa I'd bought for them 2 years ago. The same one they had chosen together. The rent I'd paid, the groceries I'd delivered, the $1,000 check I'd set aside as a wedding gift. All of it flickered in my mind, like receipts from a life I'd financed without reading the fine print. Joran mumbled something else, something about keeping it small, but I barely listened. I watched a tiny chip on the rim of my mug and felt an old ache rise from somewhere deep and unguarded. 3 years of transfers, errands, gentle reminders to pay their own bills, none of it had made me special. When the call ended, I stood for a long time, the phone still warm against my palm. Then I took the dish towel hanging by the stove and folded it, edge to edge, as neatly as I could. It was a small act, almost invisible, but I knew it marked something. The next morning, I would sit at this same table with a pen, a notebook, and the silence that follows a truth you can no longer ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too large. Every clock ticked too loud. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and the old ledger I used to keep our household accounts in Robert's handwriting, still on the inside cover. The faint note he had written decades ago for shared dreams and steady hands. I turned to a blank page and began writing, 1 line at a time. Rent $600 a month, 36 months. Groceries at least $200 each time they ran short. Medical emergencies $400 for the clinic visit, $250 for the dental work, $300 when Leda claimed her insurance hadn't gone through. Wedding contribution $800 cash. Never acknowledged. When I totaled it, the number looked unreal, $33,480. I stared at it for a long time, the ink still wet, bleeding slightly into the paper. It wasn't just money. It was afternoons I had skipped my own outings to make a transfer before the deadline. It was clothes I hadn't bought, vacations I'd postponed, dinners eaten alone so I could help. Robert's voice came back to me, quiet but steady. "Don't let kindness make you poor, Holly. People confuse generosity with obligation once you let them." He'd said it the year before he died, when I had lent money to a distant cousin who never paid it back. I'd promised him I'd learn. I hadn't. The refrigerator hummed softly, the only sound in the room. I realized I had built an entire second life around Joran and Leda's needs, an invisible job that never paid, except in exhaustion. I had believed that if I gave enough, they would remember who I was to them. Instead, they remembered only what I could provide. When dawn came, the first light spilled across the kitchen table, touching the edge of the ledger. I closed it carefully and stood. The coffee from last night sat cold in the pot. I poured it down the sink and rinsed the cup clean. My hands didn't tremble this time. I wasn't angry anymore, only awake. And in that new, quiet clarity, I knew exactly what I had to stop doing. A week passed in strange quiet. No calls, no messages, just the soft rhythm of my days returning to their own size. I woke early, watered the plants, and made breakfast without checking my phone. It felt foreign at first, as if I'd misplaced something essential. Then, one afternoon, the silence broke. The phone rang twice before I picked up. Lita's voice rushed through the receiver, bright with panic. "Halina, thank God. The rent's overdue. The landlord's threatening to evict us. You forgot to make the transfer." Her words tumbled out like a rehearsed emergency, the kind she'd perfected. I leaned against the counter, the cool tile beneath my palm steadying me. "I didn't forget," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. I stopped. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean you stopped? Joran said you promised I promised to help special people." I interrupted gently. "Do you remember?" The silence on the line stretched long enough for me to hear the faint hum of traffic outside her end. For once, she didn't have a script ready. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. "You can't just do this to us." "I already did," I said, and ended the call. I set the phone down beside the sink and waited for guilt to arrive. It didn't. What came instead was an unfamiliar lightness, a kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but clean. I put on my coat and decided to go for a walk. The park near the river was alive with sound children chasing pigeons, dogs barking, the faint music of a busker's guitar. I sat on a bench beneath a chestnut tree and watched a young mother push her stroller across the grass, one hand holding a coffee, the other steady on the handle. She laughed when her child threw a toy overboard, and I caught myself smiling, too. For years I had lived as if motherhood never ended, as if love meant constant rescue. Sitting there, with the sun easing through the branches, I realized that stepping back didn't mean abandoning anyone. It meant returning to myself. It was late afternoon when the knock came 3 short raps, too confident to belong to a stranger. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Joran standing there with Lita, her arms crossed, and a man in a pressed gray suit holding a leather folder. "Mom?" Joran began, his voice pitched in that false gentleness he used when he wanted something. "We thought we'd stop by. This is Mr. Fisk, from the firm that helps families manage legal transitions." The word transitions made my stomach tighten. What kind of transitions? Lita stepped forward before he could answer. "We've been worried about you. You've been forgetful lately. You canceled some transfers. And Joran thinks you might need a little help keeping things organized." Mr. Fisk opened his folder with a click. "A temporary power of attorney," he said smoothly. "Just until things stabilize. Nothing drastic." I looked at the papers he slid across my dining table. The pages were crisp, printed with language that smelled of trapdoors. My own handwriting flickered in my mind, those careful numbers from the ledger. The evidence of years I'd kept every account balanced to the penny. "Forgetful," they said. I took a slow breath and gathered the papers into a neat stack. "No," I said. "I don't sign anything I haven't asked for." "Mom, please." Joran tried again, the old impatience breaking through. "It's just to make things easier. For you, maybe." My voice stayed calm, but my pulse thudded in my throat. "You brought a stranger into my house without asking. That's already enough." Mr. Fisk gave a practiced smile, collecting his folder. "Perhaps another day," he murmured. I walked to the door and opened it wide. "No," I said quietly. "Not another day." "Now," they hesitated, then filed out Joran's jaw tight, Lita's heels clicking against the porch. When the door shut, the sound echoed through the house like the closing of a vault. For a moment, I stood there, my hands trembling, the air thick with the scent of their perfume and cologne. Then I saw the small brass key ring on the table, the one I had given them years ago. I picked it up, turned it once in my hand, and set it aside. This time, they would not be using my keys again. The next morning, Portland's air smelled faintly of rain and bus exhaust when I stepped off the streetcar downtown. I hadn't been to the bank in months. Joren usually preferred I handle things online. But after what happened yesterday, I needed to stand on solid ground, literal marble floors and human faces, inside the Saville and Union Bank. The same chandeliers that had hung there for decades still gave off their yellowed light. Dorian Saville, the branch manager, spotted me immediately. He'd known Robert and me since we'd opened our first joint account. His gray suit had grown looser over the years, but his handshake was still steady. "Mrs. Mirek," he said kindly, "it's been a while. What can I do for you today?" I sat across from his desk and told him. Simply, I want to stop every automatic transfer to my son's account, and I want their names removed from any shared access cards, permissions, everything. He blinked, surprised, but didn't question me. "Understood," he said, typing briskly. "Would you like me to print your account history for review?" "Yes," I replied. "All of it. I'm starting fresh." When the paperwork was done, he hesitated before speaking again. "Halina, if I may, what you're describing happens more often than you'd think. We have someone who might help you protect yourself legally." He gestured toward the adjoining office. That's how I met Maris Thorne, an attorney in her 40s with calm eyes and the sort of posture that made you believe she'd never lost an argument she truly cared about. She listened as I recounted the past few weeks, the secret wedding, the confrontation, the power of attorney trick. "This," she said finally, tapping her pen once against her notepad, "is a textbook pattern of elder financial coercion. We'll document everything: bank transfers, messages, even household receipts. You'll also want to change the locks and update your will to reflect independent control." Her tone wasn't pitying, it was precise, practical. It steadied me. We signed preliminary forms, and she promised to draft a protection plan by the end of the week. As I left the bank, the city rain had turned to a soft drizzle, washing the sidewalks clean. For the first time in years, my money and my choices belonged entirely to me. I walked toward the streetcar feeling lighter than when I'd arrived, as if I'd left more than just paperwork behind. It happened on a Tuesday morning, a week after my meeting at the bank. I was rearranging the books on Robert's old shelf when the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw a woman in a navy windbreaker holding a clipboard and a badge. "Mrs. Halina Mirek," she asked when I opened the door. "I'm with the Department of Senior Services. We've received a report about possible confusion and self-neglect. I need to conduct a brief wellness check." For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. A report, I repeated, from whom she smiled in that professional, careful way people do when they already know the answer but won't say it. "Anonymous," she replied. My heart thudded once. Hard. I thought of Joren, of Leda's precise tone when she said forgetful. The woman stepped inside, scanning the room, the neat table, the stack of bills paid and filed, the single teacup in the sink. "Do you live alone?" she asked. "Yes," I said evenly, "and quite well." Before I could say more, my phone buzzed. It was Maris Thorne, who I'd called out of instinct the moment the knock came. Within 15 minutes, she was at my door, breathless but composed, holding a folder thicker than the investigator's clipboard. "Mrs. Mirek's finances and medical records are in perfect order," Maris said, laying down documents, bank statements, insurance receipts, a note from my physician. "She drives, shops, and manages her affairs independently. I'd advise closing this file immediately." The investigator's pen froze mid-air. She glanced from Maris to me, then nodded. "Everything appears fine. I'll mark this resolved. When she left, I followed her out to the porch for air. Across the street, my neighbor Etta Vale was watering her roses. She must have seen the whole thing because she called out softly. They tried that on my sister too. Different excuse. Same guilt trip. Later that afternoon, she knocked on my door with a pot of tea and 2 cups. We sat by the window as rain began to fall, talking like old friends who had always meant to meet. Etta's laugh was deep and raspy. The trick, she said, is knowing the difference between caring for someone and being their caretaker. I smiled. I'm learning. I told her, and I meant it. The letter arrived on a Friday afternoon, sealed in thick white paper and marked Multnomah County Court. For a long moment, I just stared at it, feeling its weight in my hands before I dared to open it. Inside was a petition my son and his wife had filed to have me declared mentally incompetent. I read every line twice, the words blurred, not from confusion, but disbelief. They had cited erratic financial behavior and refusal of medical cooperation. Attached were 3 witness statements, one from a pharmacist, one from a neighbor, and one unsigned but clearly written in Leta's careful hand. According to these papers, I was unstable, forgetful, and paranoid. The pharmacist claimed I had stopped taking medication I'd never been prescribed. The neighbor described strange visitors and shouting, which could only have meant the day the wellness officer came. Lies layered neatly like bricks, each one mortared with the same cold precision. I called Maris. She arrived that evening, rain dripping from her coat. We'll fight this, she said, her tone crisp but her eyes soft with anger. I've seen this tactic before, financial guardianship disguised as concern. We'll build a stronger record than they ever could fabricate. She spread my documents across the kitchen table, proof of regular transactions, the bank's certification of my cognitive clarity, and medical notes confirming I was in good health. We'll add affidavits, she continued. Etta Vale can testify to your daily independence, and Dorian Saville will confirm your financial capacity. I'll schedule an independent exam with Dr. Moore to establish mental competency. As she gathered the papers into her briefcase, I watched her hands, quick, methodical. Sure, they reminded me of Robert's when he'd mended clocks in his workshop. Deliberate, patient, never wasting a movement. After she left, I made tea and went to the old wooden chest by the window. Inside were Robert's letters, written in the tidy script I'd once teased him for. You were always the steady one. Holly, if the world tips, find your balance and hold. I traced the curve of his handwriting. The ink faded, but certain. Outside, the streetlights flickered through steady rain. Tomorrow would bring court dates and witnesses in cold rooms, but I felt something solid forming again inside me. They wanted to make me small. Instead, they had forced me to stand upright. The rain was steady that morning, thin and cold against the stone steps of the Multnomah County Courthouse. I walked beside Maris, the air smelling faintly of wet concrete and metal. Inside, the courtroom felt colder, still pale wood, hard benches, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Across the aisle sat Joran and Lita, both dressed in black as if for a funeral. His eyes flicked toward me once, then away. She didn't look at me at all. Their attorney began with polished confidence. He called me a vulnerable senior manipulated by outsiders, his voice laced with artificial sympathy. He spoke of erratic financial behavior and unexplained hostility toward her family. Each word landed like a small bruise, but I sat still. Leta was the first witness. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, explaining that I had changed suddenly, that I refused help and surrounded myself with strangers who filled her head with suspicion. Her tears glistened neatly, as rehearsed as her tone. Then Joran spoke, his voice lower but more uncertain. He described me as confused, forgetful, not the mother he remembered. For a moment, I almost pitied him. When it was Maris's turn, her questions cut through the performance with surgical calm. "Mrs. Mirek, is this your social media page?" she asked, showing Leda a photo projected onto the courtroom screen, a wedding table filled with guests. Laughter, champagne. "You testified that the event was private and intimate." "How many guests were there?" Leda hesitated, color draining from her face. Next came the expert evaluation Dr. Moore's report, showing my cognitive scores above average for my age. The judge scanned the papers quietly before nodding to Maris. She called me last. I stood, hands steady on the wooden rail. "Mrs. Mirek," she said, "can you explain why you stopped financial support for your son and daughter-in-law?" "I didn't lose my mind," I said, my voice clear in the still air. "I just lost my patience." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Half sigh, half silence. Judge Calder, a gray-haired man with kind but measured eyes, leaned forward. "Mrs. Mirek is fully competent," he said. "This court sees no evidence of incapacity. What I do see is a troubling attempt to exploit her. Consider this a warning." When the gavel fell, the sound was soft but final. Joran turned once as he left his face unreadable, caught somewhere between shame and defeat. Spring arrived quietly, the kind Portland kind mist more than rain, green creeping back through every crack in the sidewalk. I stood at my front door, the brass hook newly installed where the old lock had been. The words engraved along its curve caught the pale morning light. "Home by consent." It wasn't about keeping people out anymore. It was about choosing who could enter. Inside, the kettle hissed. Etta arrived first, carrying a small bundle of daffodils from her garden. Maris followed a few minutes later, coat draped over one arm, her laughter breaking the soft rhythm of the rain. We settled around the kitchen table, the same table that had once held bank papers and sleepless worry. Today, it held cups of tea and a plate of lemon cookies. "I filed the final papers yesterday," Maris said, sipping carefully. "The Oregon Elder Protection Trust has accepted your donation. It'll go directly toward legal aid for women in your situation." "My situation," I echoed, smiling faintly. That phrase used to sound like a warning. Now it sounds like a reason. Etta reached over, her hands warm around mine. "You turned it into something that matters," she said. After they left, I lingered by the window. The rain had softened into a steady hush, the kind that makes every sound feel gentler. On the counter sat my new will, simple, 2 pages long, signed that morning, under beneficiary. I had written, "To peace." The house smelled faintly of chamomile and wet soil. Outside, robins hopped across the yard where the grass was finally growing thick again. I thought about Joran and Leda, not with bitterness, but with a kind of quiet acceptance. They had taken enough of my money, my trust, my time, but what they failed to take was the part of me that had built all of it, the part that knew how to begin again. I turned off the lights and let the gray daylight do the rest. The brass hook gleamed softly by the door, catching the reflection of the rain-streaked window. They tried to take what I owned, I thought, but they only taught me what I am, and for the first time in years, that was more than enough.